In this video, guys, we're going to explore the concept of what if you put your limits where everyone else puts their stops? How would that work? Stay tuned. Hey guys, warm welcome to you. Thank you for those of you who are subscribed to the channel, commenting all the time, liking, sharing. It's very, very kind of you, and it doesn't go unnoticed, all that support. And those of you who want to support the channel even more, go and check out our channel sponsor, guys. It's much appreciated. These guys are sponsoring us, and we're really pleased to have them on board. And you know how it works. They cut us a check, and they hope to get exposure from it, and people going and checking out their site. So if you go and check out their site, there you are supporting the channel. It's much appreciated. All right, guys. So what about this? How many times do you get stopped out at a low, at a high, and it's just frustrating you? How many times are you constantly getting stopped out and your account equity curve is dripping low because you're getting stopped out all the time? What about this? This is something for people who are in that situation, or for those of you who may be a little bit more intermediate advanced and want to add a little bit more flavor to your trading. So I know for me that when I started thinking a lot deeper about who was on the other side of the trade, who was trading this environment, a bit of gaming theory, I started to become much better at picking my entry points, which gives you much more cushion. Doesn't necessarily mean you're gonna have a great trade, but if you get a great entry, it just makes things a lot easier. So let's say, for example, and by the way, I'm not saying in this video that we should ignore all the other rules and where we put our stops, but under some conditions, and sometimes we should just think a little bit more moves ahead in the chess game. So rather than a couple of moves ahead, we should think maybe 4 or 5 moves ahead. What could that do? What could that do? And then try to position for that. Doesn't always mean that's going to happen, of course, because things can change in 5 moves. But at least then we can start to think a little bit more out of the textbook and out of the retail confines that many of us sometimes get stuck in. So for example, you've got a low put in here, and everyone says, okay, well, you put a stop loss here, and many people are kind of buying maybe this breakout here, and they put a stop loss here because there's nowhere else to put the risk. That's already quite a lot of risk. Here doesn't make any sense because it's noise. So that makes obvious place to kind of put your stop. And many people end up kind of sitting there as it comes down and stopping them out. So one thing to do is to maybe say to yourself, right, I'm quite late on the move. And me personally as well, I don't really like trading late move breakouts. It's not really my thing. I feel like if I haven't got it early, then I've missed the thing, and that helps lots. But it's not a strategy that you should discard. It's a good strategy under certain conditions. However, how about reframing it and saying, okay, well, instead of taking that trade there, why don't I flip everything on its head? I'm not saying reverse and go short. Why don't I put a limit in here and I put a stop down here? So in other words, if I'm kind of hypothesizing that retail is piling in long here and they're going to hope for a move up, if they're right, then fine, it doesn't cost me a thing. I'm not even involved in it. Maybe I've missed out, whatever. However, if the price comes down here and everyone's getting stopped out because it's probing for liquidity under the lows, then why don't I be the person who's taking the other side of those stops? If I know that a lot of people are buying that, and we're not just talking retail, guys, we're talking about a big sphere of people will be buying this break thinking it's going to reverse up. And if it doesn't and comes down, where's the likelihood that we get that kind of pulse move, that little bit of liquidity vacuum? It's going to be under that low. So why don't we still manage the risk, still have a stop in, but why don't we have a limit down there? Now, of course, from time to time we're going to get stopped out. The market will go through lows. Of course they do. This is the market. We're not saying this is the holy grail or silver bullet, but what we're doing here is we're framing ourselves differently and saying, right, well, if you're constantly getting stopped out because you're kind of waiting for confirmation it's coming back, then why don't you be brave and just put a limit under that low? And I would be interested to kind of poll people really and say how many people actually leave a limit under the low versus how many people leave a stop under the low. And if you just want to kind of strip out anything I say about it and just look at logic and go, most people are losing money out there. What are most people doing? Most people are putting stops under lows or highs. How many people are putting limits under lows or highs? Not very many. Maybe it's something to explore. Maybe it's something to look at under certain conditions. And bear in mind, guys, we know as well that the majority of conditions are range bound, backfilling. They don't stay in trending environments for so long. So again, using the logic of that, without going too complicated with it, If we're most of the time in a range bound environment, most of the time we're non-trending, then most of the time we're not going to new highs and new lows. So most of the time we're probably faking out through, if we even get to that, might not even get to that. So most of the time we're faking out. So now we start to do stuff that people aren't doing. We start to be against the crowd with our limits versus stops, and we start to trade an environment that's the majority of the time and not. And when we just use these two logical arguments, we can start to see that actually maybe there's something to putting a limit where our stop was. Now I've simplified this for the video, of course. I've said, listen, put a limit where the stop was. I'm not saying that we should do this just as a kind of strict method and always put a limit under lows and highs, although, you know, it's probably not a bad strategy under the right conditions. The point is to think one step ahead of where everyone's putting their stops. Think one step ahead of who's hurting and why. Think one step ahead of how the textbook would tell you to trade and what would be the best way for that trade to fail. Now, very often, you know, when we try to do the textbook trades, that's why we're so strict with the criteria and we grade it so highly, because it has to be right. But very often a failure of the textbook trade is the one that yields the most profit, you know, which is why things like this, breaks the low, oh, the people who bought that high on the whatever pattern 1, 2, 3 are getting stopped out. Well, maybe that's the end. Maybe that's just the shuffle and the shift in supply demand that's going to kind of get the liquidity and then find a little bit of buying. But the important thing is, guys, before we kind of leave the video, is, you know, if we do get the pop up to here, the beauty of being kind of at the lows and rather than buying up here and buying in this kind of category down, this area down here, is that you've got so much cushion to work with. You can really take the risk off the trade if you want to. You can scale out 50% of the trade there. You can have your stop there now, and you've really mitigated the risk if you're not sure on this type of thing. And of course, you know, if your limit's there and your stop's there, you're still going to take a stop anyway. It would be no different for you going long there and getting stopped there. You're still the same monetary risk. It's perceived a little bit more because sometimes the volatility picks up as it goes through lows. So I never recommend putting it too tight, but there's something to consider, something to think about. Something maybe that isn't covered so much is that, you know, why does everyone put their stops? So why not start by thinking of a strategy where you put your limit where everyone's stop is, and forming and building a strategy, you know, based on that thesis. All right, guys, if you like this kind of stuff, a thumbs up is appreciated. Take care. Until the next one, hope it's some food for thought. Bye bye.